It was supposed to be a normal evening inside a modest home tucked away on a quiet street. Dinner had been served, the kitchen filled with the usual clinking of plates and the low hum of family conversation. To anyone passing outside, nothing seemed unusual. Yet behind those walls, tension had been simmering for weeks, and that night it finally erupted, transforming the heart of the home, the kitchen, into a scene that would later be studied like the opening chapter of a psychological thriller. The house itself carried no dark reputation. Neighbors described it as ordinary, perhaps even forgettable, a small structure where lights flickered on in the evenings and shut off promptly at night. The family inside was quiet, reserved, and not one to draw attention. To those who lived nearby, they were neither close friends nor suspicious figures. Just another family in the rows of homes that made up the neighborhood. But the truth about what went on inside would eventually leave the entire community in shock. On that evening, the father sat at the head of the table, weary from work, his mind distracted by bills piling up and the stress of a routine that felt endless. The children picked at their food, sensing the tension that often filled the air when their parents exchanged even the smallest words. And then there was the mother, moving with sharp precision as she cleared dishes and rearranged things in the kitchen. Every motion she made seemed controlled, almost rehearsed, as though she were preparing for something no one else in the room understood. Arguments had become common between the couple, though always subtle enough to avoid drawing attention from neighbors or friends. Yet, what seemed like typical family disagreements were slowly mutating into something much darker. The mother's voice carried an edge that night, each word she directed at her husband cutting sharper than the last. He tried to keep calm, tried to swallow the frustration. But years of silence and hidden resentment began to boil over. What started as a low exchange of words soon escalated into something else entirely. The children froze, their forks hovering above their plates, their eyes darting nervously from one parent to the other. They had seen fights before, but this felt different. There was a weight in the air, a dangerous shift they could sense but could not name. Their father's tone grew firmer, his voice louder, as he accused her of things she had long avoided answering. Money missing, strange late night phone calls, locked drawers in the bedroom. He wanted answers, and he was not backing down this time. The mother, however, had perfected the art of control. Her calm smile twisted into something colder, her eyes narrowing as she leaned against the kitchen counter. Her words were calculated, designed not to explain but to provoke. She denied his accusations but did so with an indifference that was almost chilling. She spoke of his failures, his weaknesses, turning the confrontation back on him. And in that moment, something inside the father snapped. He slammed his hand down on the table, the sudden sound making the children flinch in terror. What followed was chaos. The kitchen, once filled with the simple noise of family dinner, exploded into shouts, the scraping of chairs, and the sound of objects falling to the floor. Plates shattered. A glass rolled off the counter and burst into fragments. The children cried out, retreating into the corners, desperate to disappear from the storm unraveling before them. What none of them realized was that this argument was not just another domestic fight. It was the unraveling of secrets that had been buried for far too long. Later, investigators would piece together the timeline, noting how quickly the atmosphere had turned violent, how suddenly a seemingly ordinary kitchen had been transformed into a scene of dread. They would uncover the chilling details of what happened after that first slam of the hand, how every scream and every movement became a link in a chain of tragedy. Witnesses in the neighborhood would recall faint sounds of shouting that night, but no one thought it was serious enough to call for help. Only when the truth emerged would they realize how silence had allowed horror to spread unchecked. That night, the Cleland kitchen became more than just the center of a home. It became a crime scene, a place where trust shattered, where innocence was lost, and where the true darkness within a family was finally exposed. And the most disturbing part of it all, the horror that unfolded was not sudden madness, but the result of years of control, deception, and hidden cruelty boiling to the surface. The truth about what happened in that kitchen is the kind of story that lingers long after it is told, leaving behind chills that no one can shake. Part 2, the truth about that night, began to take shape only after investigators walked through the doorway and stepped into the kitchen. What they found was not just a room in disarray, but a scene frozen in time, every detail speaking of the violence that had erupted within those walls. The table was overturned, chairs scattered, shards of glass and porcelain scattered across the floor like jagged reminders of a dinner that had gone terribly wrong. There was food still smeared across plates, now cracked and broken, a silent echo of the moment when normalcy had slipped into chaos. At first glance, it could have looked like nothing more than a domestic argument taken too far. But as the detectives surveyed the space, they knew this was more than a simple fight. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves held onto the echoes of screams. Every corner told part of the story, a streak of blood against the counter, deep scratches on the wooden surface of the table, and a knife lying abandoned near the sink, its handle wet, its blade marked with something no one wanted to admit out loud. The children were the first to give investigators a clearer picture of what had unfolded. Though terrified and shaken, their small voices carried the weight of truth. They described the shouting, the anger that had exploded, and how their father had demanded explanations their mother refused to give. They spoke of sudden movements of objects thrown and of their own desperate attempts to hide. Their words were halting, broken by tears, but they aligned with the evidence scattered across the kitchen. Piece by piece, the horror of that night came into focus. It was not simply a fight over money or suspicion. It was years of manipulation and control erupting into violence. The mother, cornered by accusations she could no longer evade, had lashed out. Investigators believed she reached for the knife, not in panic, but in anger, a calculated act meant to silence confrontation. The father had tried to defend himself, the struggle leaving marks across the room. The children, trapped in the middle, had seen more than any child should ever see. By the time neighbors knocked on the door, alerted by the crash of breaking glass, it was too late. The scene was already drenched in the aftermath of a crime that could no longer be hidden. The neighbors would later tell reporters that they had heard raised voices before, but never imagined it could end this way. Some admitted they had noticed small things, bruises, nervous glances from the children, strange absences, but they dismissed them as private family matters. That night shattered their complacency. They realized too late that the family they thought they knew had been living on the edge of tragedy for years. When authorities removed the children from the house, the weight of what they had endured began to sink in. Their trembling bodies, their hollow eyes, told a story beyond words. They clung to officers not out of familiarity, but out of sheer relief, as though they had finally escaped a nightmare that had followed them every waking hour. The kitchen had been the stage for their terror, but the fear had lived in them far longer than one night. Forensic teams worked carefully, collecting every fragment, every trace, determined to reconstruct the sequence of events. Each broken dish, each drop of blood, became part of the larger puzzle. What they uncovered painted a picture, not of a single act of violence, but of a pattern. It was the culmination of years of secrets, of suppressed truths, of a home where appearances had always hidden something darker. The kitchen was not just a crime scene, it was the final unmasking of the monster that had lived among them. The father, though deeply wounded, survived that night. But survival came with a burden heavier than most could comprehend. As he sat in a hospital bed, detectives questioning him about what had happened, his answers revealed a man broken by betrayal. He spoke of years of trust, of love given freely, of doubts he ignored because he wanted to believe in the woman he had married. Now, he realized the cost of that blindness. He had shared a home with someone capable of destruction, and the worst part was that his children had paid the highest price. The chilling part of this story is not only the violence that erupted in one kitchen, but the truth it revealed that monsters do not always arrive as strangers. Sometimes, they are already inside the home, wearing familiar faces, hiding behind routines and the illusion of normal life. That night, the Cleland family's kitchen turned from a place of gathering into a place of terror, leaving behind a story that would haunt the town for years to come. Part 3. In the days that followed, the Cleland family kitchen became the focus of an investigation that peeled back layers of secrets no one outside the house had ever suspected. Reporters crowded the street, cameras flashing against the dark outline of the home. Neighbors stood in silence, shaking their heads as if they still could not believe the truth. To them, the Clelands had been ordinary, perhaps a bit private, but never the kind of family to become the center of such horror. Yet as detectives dug deeper, the word ordinary no longer fit. The picture forming behind closed doors was one of control, fear, and a slow descent into violence. Investigators reconstructed the events of that night step by step. The argument began. as it often did with suspicion. Money missing, locked drawers, phone calls that came too late at night. The father, weary from carrying the weight of unanswered questions, had finally refused to stay silent. His voice, usually quiet, rose until even the neighbors could hear. But what truly escalated the fight was not his anger, but her reaction. The mother's calm demeanor slipped, replaced by rage that had been simmering for years. In her journals, later discovered in a dresser drawer, she wrote about discipline and control in chilling detail, as if her family were pawns in a game only she understood. That night, when confronted, she snapped. The children's testimony added to the horror. They described how their mother's eyes changed in moments of anger, how her voice grew sharp, and how fear had become their constant companion. One child admitted that they often whispered to their siblings at night, promising each other they would escape one day. The youngest confessed that they used to dream of running away but never did, because they feared no one would believe them. Their words revealed years of hidden torment, years when the kitchen, the place where families should share laughter and meals, had been a room of dread. Forensic evidence confirmed their stories. The knife found near the sink bore fingerprints that matched only the mother's. Blood on the floor belonged to the father, who had tried to defend himself in the sudden eruption of violence. Scratches on the furniture aligned with the struggle described by the children. Nothing about the scene suggested accident or panic. It pointed to intent, to rage carried out with precision. The father's survival was both a relief and a torment. He had lived, but in doing so, he was forced to face the unbearable truth the woman he had loved, trusted, and shared a life with had tried to destroy him in front of their children. His body bore the wounds of the attack, but his heart carried something deeper, an endless weight of guilt. He admitted to investigators that he had noticed signs over the years, but convinced himself they were nothing. He remembered nights when the children seemed withdrawn, when their laughter seemed forced, when fear flashed across their eyes at the sound of their mother's footsteps. He had ignored it, hoping it was temporary. Now he realized his silence had cost them their safety. The trial preparations began swiftly, and the story drew national attention. Media outlets painted the case as a chilling example of hidden evil, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we know best. People across the country debated how a mother could turn into something so cruel, how a father could remain blind for so long, and how children could endure years of silence without anyone noticing. Each headline made the Cleland name synonymous with horror. But beyond the media frenzy, the children's struggle continued. Removed from their home, they were placed in protective care, surrounded by counselors who worked tirelessly to help them process what they had endured. Their nightmares were vivid. Their trust in adults was shattered. They jumped at sudden noises, recoiled at raised voices, and carried the invisible scars of growing up in a home where love was a weapon. Healing, the experts warned, would take years, if it came at all. For the community, the case was a mirror reflecting their own silence. Neighbors who had noticed small oddities now regretted their inaction. Teachers who saw the children's quiet behavior replayed their own dismissals, realizing too late that those were cries for help. The Cleland family's tragedy became a warning that ignoring small signs can allow horror to grow unchecked. That kitchen, once the center of family meals, had become a symbol. It was no longer a place of warmth, but a place where secrets died, where masks slipped, and where the truth about one woman's darkness was finally exposed. And as the case moved toward trial, one haunting reality settled over everyone involved. That night was not an isolated outburst. It was the climax of years of hidden cruelty, a storm that had been building long before a single plate shattered on the floor. Part 4. As the trial began, the once quiet Cleland home was now remembered not for its walls or the family dinners it once held, but for the kitchen that had turned into a crime scene. The courtroom was filled with journalists, curious onlookers, and families who wanted to understand how something so horrific could happen behind ordinary doors. The mother sat at the defense table, her expression unnervingly calm. She did not look like someone accused of tearing her family apart. She looked detached, almost defiant, as though the world misunderstood her entirely. That composure chilled everyone watching, because it suggested something far darker than simple anger. It suggested a lack of remorse. Prosecutors wasted no time in laying out the evidence. Photographs of the kitchen, the overturned table, the bloodstains, and the knife were displayed for the jury. They presented medical reports confirming the father's injuries and psychological evaluations of the children that spoke of years of abuse. Each piece of evidence stacked higher, forming a case that was difficult to dispute. The prosecutors painted a portrait of a woman who had lived two lives: the quiet, reserved mother shown to neighbors, and the manipulative, controlling figure who terrorized her family in private. The children's testimony was perhaps the hardest moment of the trial. Shielded by protective screens so they would not have to look directly at their mother, they recounted what life had been like inside the Cleland home. Their voices trembled but carried undeniable truth. They spoke of nights locked in their rooms, of punishments that never made sense, and of constant fear whenever their mother entered the kitchen. One child described how they would stare at the clock during dinner, waiting for the moment they could leave the table without sparking her anger. Another admitted they never told their father because their mother convinced them he would not believe them. Those words tore through the courtroom like a blade, striking the father harder than any wound from that night ever could. The defense tried to paint a different story. They argued that the mother was overwhelmed, that the father was inattentive, and that what happened in the kitchen was a moment of desperation rather than intent. They claimed she was misunderstood, that her actions were twisted by stress, by years of carrying the weight of responsibility. But her journals, uncovered by investigators, told a very different story. Written in cold detail, they revealed her obsession with control, her view of discipline as domination, and her justification for cruelty, as if it were a duty. Those pages silenced the defense's narrative, leaving little doubt about her true intentions. The father's testimony was filled with raw guilt. He admitted to noticing signs but never acting on them, to brushing off his instincts out of love and misplaced trust. His tears in court were not only for himself but for his children, for the years of suffering they endured while he stood by, blind to the truth. His pain, laid bare before the jury, added another layer of tragedy to an already unbearable story. He was not the monster, but he had lived beside one and done nothing to stop her. Outside the courtroom, the case became a national headline. Reporters described it as one of the most haunting family crime stories in years, a chilling reminder of how evil often hides behind familiar faces. Neighbors who once described the mother as quiet and polite now spoke of their regrets, remembering the small red flags they ignored, the children's nervous glances, the way the house always seemed so tense. The trial forced everyone to confront the reality that silence and inaction can be just as dangerous as the crime itself. For the children, testifying was both painful and liberating. They were forced to relive their worst memories, but in doing so, they finally broke the silence that had bound them for years. Counselors reminded them that speaking the truth was the first step toward healing, though the road ahead would be long. The trauma of that kitchen scene would never fully fade, but the act of telling the world what had happened gave them back a measure of power. By the end of the trial, the mask the mother had worn for years was gone. She was no longer the quiet woman neighbors thought they knew, no longer the mother who appeared shy and harmless. She was revealed as what she truly was, a predator who thrived on control, who destroyed her own family for power, and who carried no remorse for the damage she caused. The kitchen, once the heart of family life, was the stage where her mask finally slipped, and the world saw the monster that had always been there. Part 5. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom sat in heavy silence. Every person inside seemed to hold their breath as the jury foreperson stood, a folded piece of paper trembling faintly in hand. Hours of deliberation had brought them here, and what they were about to say carried the weight of years of torment, every shattered plate, every bruise, every frightened whisper that had echoed through the Cleland kitchen. The words cut through the air like thunder. Guilty on multiple counts of assault, child endangerment, and attempted murder. The impact of that word, guilty, sent a ripple through the room. Some gasped softly, others simply bowed their heads in grim recognition of the inevitable. The children, sitting quietly under the watchful eyes of social workers, barely reacted. They had learned long ago not to show too much, not to give away their feelings. The father wept silently, shoulders shaking, but even his grief seemed muted, weighed down by years of guilt that no verdict could erase. At the center of it all sat the mother, the woman who had orchestrated the nightmare. She showed no visible reaction. Her face remained as still as stone, her eyes void of emotion. Through the entire trial, she had worn indifference like armor. No tears, no apology, no recognition of the devastation she had caused. Her lack of remorse was confirmation of what many already suspected, that she had never truly seen her family as people to love, but only as possessions to control. The judge delivered a harsh sentence, ensuring she would spend decades behind bars. The prosecutors called it justice, a victory for the children who had endured unimaginable cruelty. But for those who had lived through it, victory was the last word they would have chosen. How could prison bars bring back the years stolen from 3 innocent children? How could a legal decision undo the nights of fear, the silence that suffocated, the betrayal that had cut so deep? The sentence might have removed her from their lives, but it could not erase the scars she left behind. The children had been robbed of something no court could restore: trust, innocence, and the simple comfort of feeling safe in their own home. For them, the kitchen table, once a universal symbol of warmth and family, was now a site of fear, a place where control had replaced love. The father, though alive and free, carried his own punishment, heavier than any prison term. He could not shake the torment of knowing he had failed them. He replayed every moment in his mind, searching for signs he missed, blaming himself for every bruise unseen, every cry unheard. His guilt was a sentence he would serve for the rest of his life. In the months that followed, the Cleland home stood abandoned. The windows were shuttered, the front door locked. It became more than a building. It became a silent monument to the suffering that had unfolded inside. Neighbors passed it quickly, avoiding its shadow, their voices dropping to whispers whenever the house came into view. It was as though speaking too loudly near it might awaken the ghosts of what had happened there. Eventually, the property was sold, remodeled, and painted over with the appearance of something new. Yet for those who knew the truth, no fresh coat of paint could erase the memories. That kitchen was not simply a room. It had become a symbol, a warning of what happens when silence shields secrets for too long. The children, though freed from their mother's grip, faced a long and painful journey toward healing. Therapy became a lifeline. In sessions, they slowly began to separate themselves from the fear that had once defined them. They learned to identify their mother's cruelty as abuse, not discipline, to understand that love does not come with violence attached. But healing was never linear. Some nights, nightmares pulled them back into the sound of shattering glass, into the echo of their mother's voice, raised in rage. Other nights, silence itself became the enemy, a reminder of the quiet control that once ruled their home. Still, with time, they began to find small victories, smiling in school, making friends, laughing without fear. To outsiders, those moments seemed ordinary. To the Cleland children, they were everything. The father devoted himself to his children with a kind of desperation. He vowed never again to let silence protect evil. He was there for every therapy session, every school event, every tear in the middle of the night. He knew he could not undo the past, but he could make the future different. He began to speak publicly about their story, not to exploit his children's pain, but to prevent others from falling into the same trap of ignoring small signs. He spoke in schools, churches, and community halls, urging people to trust their instincts, to ask questions when something felt off, and to listen, truly listen, to children. His words carried a simple but chilling reminder: monsters do not always arrive as strangers in the dark. Sometimes they sit across from you at dinner, smiling, hiding, waiting. The Cleland case became a lesson that spread far beyond their small community. It was studied in classrooms, in training sessions for teachers, counselors, and law enforcement officers. It became an example of how cruelty can live quietly inside an ordinary-looking home, unnoticed until it is too late. The story forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, about silence, and about the importance of speaking up. The mother remained behind bars, her name etched into case files, news articles, and documentaries as a figure of coldness and cruelty. She never admitted guilt, never apologized, never acknowledged the pain she inflicted. Psychologists who studied her behavior described an insatiable hunger for control, a chilling inability to see her family as anything more than extensions of herself. Her warped sense of discipline had blurred into destruction long before anyone realized. She would never again be remembered as a mother. Instead, she was forever known as the monster who turned her family's kitchen into a place of fear. Years later, when people spoke of the Cleland family, they rarely mentioned the physical house anymore. They spoke instead of the warning it carried. They spoke of the importance of listening to children, of paying attention to the quiet signs, of understanding that silence does not always mean peace. The story lived on not only in the scars of those who survived, but in the awareness it created in the world around them. The kitchen where the horror had unfolded may have been rebuilt, its walls repainted, its furniture replaced, but its memory remained untouched. It stood as proof that behind even the most ordinary doors, darkness can thrive unnoticed. The truth of that home, the shouting, the fear, the broken trust, continues to send chills through anyone who hears the story. Because the Cleland case was never just about one family. It was about every moment when people look away, every time a child's voice goes unheard, and every monster who hides in plain sight until it is too late. And perhaps that is why the story endures. It is not only a tragedy but a warning, a reminder that evil does not need shadows to thrive, it only needs silence. The Cleland kitchen may have been cleaned, repainted, and rebuilt, but no matter how much time passes, the memory of that night still lingers. It is a reminder that evil does not always break through the window in the middle of the night. Sometimes it is already inside, wearing the face of someone we trust, waiting for the moment to strike. The case of the Cleland family is not just a story of violence. It is a story of silence, of warning signs ignored, of innocence lost. And perhaps the most haunting truth of all is this: the most terrifying monsters are not strangers in the dark. They are the ones who sit across from us at the dinner table.